I am the famous American, and I have a very interesting topic for you to consider. There are 5 things that often we sort of conflate a little bit. And this is very intriguing. This is very interesting. Let's start with the first one. Every person has a nationality. For example, very clearly, I'm American. I'm from the United States. You can tell that from my accent. I was born in the United States. I've lived my life here in the United States. Yes, I've traveled the world. I've spent 2 summers teaching English in Thailand. I've spent some time in Korea doing the same. I've done that also in Trinidad and Tobago. I have went on a vacation in New Zealand. And of course, I've crossed the border to Canada. So I've been, but yet I've lived most of my life here in the United States. That is my nationality. But don't conflate that with my national origin. If we were to climb my family tree, go back about 110 years ago, what we would see is my great-grandfather arriving off of a boat from Italy. We would also see another one of my great-grandfathers showing up on a train from Mexico. So, and that's the case, as we start looking at our grandparents and our great-grandparents, we can see that they may have traveled from other countries where they were originally citizens, then they moved here. So, in a concept as an American, to imply that my national origin is American isn't quite true, because that's implying that I'm Native American. And while I am, not exactly what we think. So let's go on to the third one, and that is ethnic background. So for example, speaking of that Mexican great-grandfather I had, when you look at his actual DNA, well, it would be roughly half Spanish, and it'd be roughly Aztec, Mayan, etc. And that is what my own DNA test revealed. It actually shows my estimate markers closer to about 20%, more like a fifth of those genetic markers of Native American. Again, but when I say Native American, specifically modern day Mexico, Aztec, Mayan, etc. We could also look at that great-grandfather from Italy that I mentioned a moment ago, okay? Well, when I take a DNA test, it shows 0% Italian. Yet half of my family, half of my mother's family was from Italy. So a quarter of mine, a quarter of my heritage, ethnic background should go back to Italy, and 0% is what shows up on the test. Instead, what shows up, and we have to look at it very carefully, mine shows up mainly as Spanish, but when my mother took the same test, it showed up more specifically as Sephardic Jewish and Middle Eastern. So, apparently, I have ancestors that converted to Catholicism a while back before they ever crossed over the ocean from Italy. So, we've talked about where you're born, your nationality, we've talked about your national origin, where your ancestors came from before they came to your country. And then we've also got ethnic background. So, for example, apparently I had plenty of ancestors who came from Italy that weren't necessarily, quote, Italian. They had converted from Judaism, they had converted from perhaps Islam. And that was a different ethnic background that's not necessarily the same as their nationality. But it gets even more confusing when we start talking about religion. Like I had just pointed out, I apparently have ancestry that goes back pointing to people who were Muslim, who were Jewish. But yet, I am not Muslim and I am not Jewish of those religious faiths. It's interesting with the Jewish thing because my mother's DNA test definitely shows that she's Sephardic Jewish. But we don't practice that religion. So it can be easy to conflate. There could be a Jewish person who maybe converted to a different religion or was not religious at all, which brings me to the last one. And that would be the concept of someone who is not religious at all, but they happen to have the DNA and culture of someone who would be. For example, modern day, a lot of them here in the United States, self-proclaimed atheist Jews or agnostic Jews. So when you look at their DNA, you look at their heritage, you look at even ultimately where they originally came from on the planet, everything would point back to Jewish. But if they don't believe in it, then it doesn't matter. So you can really get fancy here. You can have a person who lives in the United States who DNA test shows Chinese, but ultimately their ancestors came from Thailand and they could convert to Christianity. So they're not of the same religion you'd expect someone in China to have, or any religion. They're all different. Now some could easily be the same. Very well could be. We have someone from a certain country where it's pretty much the same ethnic mix and they all have the same basic religion and all of their ancestors, generations go back, we're all there. That could be the case, and sometimes it is. But I think especially for people in the United States, that's not the case. I think this is interesting. I think this is fascinating. Let's talk more about it right here in the comments.